Remembering victims of the Lama boat crash 1 year on. Celebrations and protests mark National Day. And US government shut down amid partisan bickering.
Good evening. Executive Council convener Lam Wun Kwong says the government will take responsibility for the Lama boat disaster if it's found to be at fault. 1 year on, and for many, the scars remain. Evelina Leung has our top story.
A Buddhist ceremony was held on Lama Island today to remember those who died exactly a year ago. Families of some of the victims and others looked on.
Well, I'm here to support my Sifu, to do a puja for the souls of all those people in that terrible accident, and to hope that 1 year on that they can all rest in peace.
1 year after 39 people were killed in the disaster, questions remain on whether any government officials should be held responsible. Undersecretary for Transport and Housing, Yeo Shing-mu, pointed out today that an internal Marine Department investigation is still underway. He said the process is taking a long time because some of the records they're looking at were from more than a decade ago. Executive Council convener Lam Wun Kwong said if government officials are found to be at fault, the administration will accept responsibility and take measures to improve. Today's annual National Day fireworks has been cancelled. Vessels from Hong Kong and Kowloon Ferry, whose boat was involved in the disaster last year, will sound their horns at 8:20 tonight, the moment the accident happened, in memory of the victims. The other company involved, Hong Kong Electric, will also hold a ceremony tonight. Following the tragedy, the Marine Department has announced a series of safety measures. This includes requiring vessels to install an automatic identification system, as well as a radar system to avoid collisions. While the aim is to prevent another tragedy from happening again, some small businesses say this is too much for them to bear. The Ping Chau Kai Tow Limited, which operates services between Mui Wo and Discovery Bay, says it will have to close down soon as a result. Company Director Ken Wong said they have been using boats without power generators. If they have to comply with the new regulations, it will cost them about $200,000, something he said that the company can't afford. That's prompting calls for the government to subsidize not only large ferry companies, but also take smaller businesses into consideration. Evelina Leung, TVB News.
Celebrations were held across the country today, marking the 64th anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic of China. Here in Hong Kong, Chief Executive Leung Chun-ying called on the city to take advantage of its strengths as the nation continues to develop. Kicking off a day of celebrations, Chief Executive Leung Chun-ying and other officials observed the flag-raising ceremony at Golden Bohemia Square early in the morning. The ceremony also included air and sea displays by the disciplinary forces. Among the members of the public who witnessed the grand moment were many mainland tourists. This boy from Zhuhai said he'd been there since 6 a.m., 2 hours before the ceremony, because he was excited to be part of the National Day celebrations. In a speech at a cocktail reception afterwards, the chief executive said Hong Kong has maintained a high degree of openness and internationalization while protecting the country's sovereignty and the SAR's interests over the past year. Leung pointed out that as Hong Kong and the mainland become closer, the city needs to be proactive in finding its own position in the face of new levels of cooperation and competition. He said the advantages of both one country and two systems should be utilized to boost the development of both the SAR and the motherland. Also present at the reception were former chief executives Tung Chee-hwa and Donald Tsang. But lawmaker Leung Kwok-hung was denied entry by staff who said his shoes were inappropriate. In Beijing, state leaders braved the rain to mark the anniversary in Tiananmen Square. President Xi Jinping led other senior officials in singing the national anthem. They also put their umbrellas away and stood in the drizzling rain for a moment of silence in respect for those who have died for the country. And keeping in line with the new administration's mission to avoid extravagance, Beijing media reported that part of the elaborate floral arrangements in fact reused material from last year's ceremony.
Many groups also staged protests on National Day. Among them were members of the student group Scholarism, who were taken away from where the flag-raising ceremony was held. Joao da Silva has that story.
Student group Scholarism made an appearance at the flag-raising ceremony this morning. Member Joshua Wong told TVB News they were there to express the public's desire to nominate chief executive candidates as Hong Kong heads towards universal suffrage. He hoped people who came here for different reasons could express themselves peacefully. But during the interview, a few men dragged him away. Wong demanded to see identification and the reason for their actions, but was ignored. Also out to protest today was the Hong Kong Alliance in support of patriotic democratic movements of China. Chairman Lee Cheuk-yan said the incident involving Wong shows that freedom is being encroached upon in Hong Kong.
Why can't he express himself there? Does it mean that in the flag-raising ceremony it's not Hong Kong? It's already in China. People in suit, we don't know who, not even show their identity, taking them, Mr. Wong away from the interview. So it shows one thing also, that China is not free, and now Hong Kong is not free.
The alliance marched from Times Square to the government headquarters to protest against what they see as President Xi Jinping's failure to promote democracy on the mainland.
The paper cages and the name tags they're wearing represent the 141 people they claim have been arrested in President Xi Jinping's China for political reasons.
It is an important date for us to protest because, there are lots of dissidents while they are being locked up by the Chinese authorities. So I think, on this day, we are obliged to come here to protest.
Also calling for the release of political dissidents across the border, the League of Social Democrats rallied from Southern Playground to Golden Bohemia Square this morning. The group was barred from entering the venue of the flag-raising ceremony. It held its own moment of silence outside and burned their protest letter. Joao da Silva, TVB News.
Overseas, and the U.S. federal government has begun its first partial shutdown in nearly 20 years after Congress failed to agree on a budget. Republicans insisted on delays to President Barack Obama's health care plan in return for budget approval, something that was rejected by the Democrats. Tony Sabine reports.
The threat of a partial government shutdown had been hanging over the United States for weeks. Today, Americans faced up to the fact that a shutdown was now a reality. Federal agencies have cut back on services, closing parks and museums, and putting up to 1 million workers on unpaid leave. The situation, described as absurd and reckless by many, came about after lawmakers failed to break a political stalemate over U.S. President Barack Obama's healthcare plan, which is supposed to widen insurance coverage for Americans without it. Republicans, who control the House of Representatives, refused to approve the budget unless there was a delay in the plan dubbed Obamacare. Naturally, the Democrat-led Senate was never going to agree to those terms, leading to the first partial shutdown in 17 years.
Republicans will once again threaten to shut down the government unless Democrats repeal Obamacare for a year. But once again, we will not relitigate the health care debate or negotiate at the point of a gun.
Those performing essential services won't be affected for now, while Obama promised the military will get paid.
Congress has passed, and I'm signing into law, legislation to make sure you get your paychecks on time.
Republican leader John Boehner maintained his party wants to fund the government, but insisted compromises are needed on health care. After the shutdown took effect, he was asked about whether he felt responsible for leaving hundreds of thousands without a paycheck.
What's your message to them, and do you have a plan to restore back pay to them?
The House has voted to keep the government open. But we also want basic fairness for all Americans under Obamacare.
What do you say to those workers, sir?
The shutdown could last only for days rather than weeks if the two sides can quickly decide on new proposals for a compromise. Polls show more blame the Republicans than the Democrats for this debacle, which doesn't bode well for the GOP in next year's elections.
South Korea's military put on quite a display today as the country celebrated its Armed Forces Day. About 11,000 troops, 190 weapons systems and 120 aircraft were featured in the ceremony at a military airport just south of Seoul. The South Korean military also displayed its longest-range missile capable of striking all of North Korea, as well as other sophisticated weapons. The impressive military ceremony was meant to show Pyongyang that any provocation would be met with strong retaliation. It was South Korea's biggest Armed Forces Day ceremony in a decade. And back locally now, the number of mainland tour groups that arrived in Hong Kong today was down by almost 1/3 from a year ago. As Stephanie Choi reports, it's part of the fallout from the new tourism law that's now in effect across the border.
This morning, Golden Bauhinia Square in Wan Chai was bustling with people. Most of them were mainland tourists on their National Day Golden Week holiday. Those traveling on their own and not as part of a tour group say it's not about the money, but the freedom of not having a guide tell them what to do. This man's priority is to visit tourist attractions before finding good shopping deals.
The first here is to visit the tourists, and the second is to buy some goods back to China.
After joining a tour to visit Hong Kong last time, this woman thinks traveling on her own would give her the chance to explore local culture.
They will take us to Disneyland, but we are adults, and they take us to the shopping malls. Very crowded, and this time we want to go to some places that not very tourists will go.
But not everyone could enjoy this kind of freedom. This mainland tourist said his group arrived in Hong Kong today, and the tour guide already has plans to take them to designated shops tomorrow as listed on the itinerary. According to the tourism law that takes effect today, mainland tour groups are banned from taking visitors to designated shopping areas and earning commissions as a result. Still, the new law didn't seem to have stopped agencies from lining up a list of stores where tour groups would shop for specified time intervals. According to the Travel Industry Council, about 250 mainland tours arrived in Hong Kong today, down 30% from last year. And while the number of shopping tours has gone down, they still make up 1/5 of the groups that got here today. Stephanie Choi, TVB News.
The government is conducting stress tests to see if Hong Kong is able to lift its export restrictions on baby milk powder formula. But as Vicky Kong reports, some doubt whether this assessment will give an accurate picture of the situation.
Feeding babies is a struggle for parents in North District. This woman said she used to go all the way to Tuen Mun, Yuen Long and even the Peak to buy milk powder for her child. Before the government implemented export restrictions earlier this year, pharmacies in Shengshui often ran out of baby milk powder formula due to bulk purchases from mainland customers or parallel goods traders.
Some of the lady also asked me to buy for them because some of the shop banned the lady for buying too much.
The government is now evaluating the situation to see if Hong Kong is able to relax its export restrictions. But some residents we talked with today think the evaluation won't reflect the actual situation because the time frame for assessment is too short. Others think the government shouldn't have announced the tests because it might tempt shop owners to store more milk powder.
The pressure test is on, but it's hard to say if the government's assessment can generate accurate results on supply here in Hong Kong. This is because export restrictions are still in place, discouraging potential traders to buy milk powder in large quantities to sell on the mainland. Vicky Kong, TVB News.
And that's the news for tonight. Have a very lovely public holiday.
Good night.